On a cold Tuesday morning in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, an 83-year-old woman in a flour-dusted apron flipped the sign on her bakery window from closed to open, the way she had done 6 mornings a week for 65 years, and froze with her hand still on the glass. Across the narrow street, parked directly opposite her front door, sat a black Cadillac Escalade with windows tinted so dark they looked painted. The engine was off. The driver did not move. A thin line of breath fogged the inside of the windshield, the only proof anyone was alive in there at all. Lucia Castaldi, Nana Lou to the whole neighborhood, made the small sign of the cross she had made every morning since 1959 and went back to her dough. She did not yet know the car would still be there at sundown. Or the next day. Or the next 30. To understand how a black SUV came to sit outside a bakery in Brooklyn for a month, you have to understand the bakery first, and the woman inside it. Castaldi's Forno had stood on the same corner of 18th Avenue since the autumn of 1959, when Vito Castaldi, Nana Lou's husband, 31 years old, fresh off the boat from Palermo, laid the last brick of the oven himself, with his own two scarred hands. The oven was the heart of the place. Vito had built it from second-hand fire brick, lined it with clay he carried back from a quarry upstate, and lit the first fire on the 3rd of October, 1959, with a piece of his mother's apron tucked into the flue for luck. The fire had been kept alive, in one form or another, ever since. 65 years of bread, Nana Lou would say. Not one cold morning. She lit it at 4. She closed the damper at 9 at night. In between, the bakery smelled the way it had always smelled, yeast and burnt sugar and rosemary, and the faint, comforting note of olive oil rubbed into the wooden countertop by 3 generations of hands. The walls were a museum. No one had asked for photos in mismatched frames, layered 3 deep, going back decades. Vito in a paper hat in 1962, holding up a long loaf like a baby. Cousins from the old country in heavy coats. A first communion picture of a boy named Tommy, now 64, who still came in once a month for a sfogliatella. Locals came at all hours. Mrs. Genovese, 86, came at 6 for a single roll still warm. Father Donato came at 7 for 2 cannoli he claimed were for the rectory, but ate one in the doorway. Construction guys came at 8. School kids at 3. Old men with newspapers at 4. Nobody asked Nana Lou for ID. Nobody asked for credit cards. She kept a tin box under the counter, the same tin box Vito had bought on 86th in 1960, and the cash went into it, and somehow the rent always got paid. Vito had died in the spring of 1992 in the apartment above the bakery, in the bed they had shared since their wedding night. Near the end he had asked her, "Promise me, Lucia, promise me you keep the oven warm." She had promised. She had been keeping the oven warm for 32 years on her own. She had buried him in May. She had opened the bakery again on Monday. Now she was 83. Her knees hurt. Her hip had been replaced in 2019, and she still climbed the 4 steps up to the apartment every night, slower each year. Her grandson Marco, 28, lived with her since her daughter had moved to Florida. He worked at a marketing firm in Manhattan, came home on the express train at 6:30, kissed her on both cheeks, and ate at the counter while she closed up. He was a good boy. He was also the only family she had left within 500 miles. The trouble had started a year before the SUV. A developer named Wendell Krieger, from a glass tower in Midtown, the kind of man who carried 2 phones and wore loafers without socks, had begun buying buildings on the block. First the laundromat, then the old shoe repair, then the brownstone where the Cuban family had lived for 40 years. The renderings showed 14 stories of luxury condominiums, where Castaldi's Forno currently stood. They called it the Palazzo. There were no Italians in the renderings. Krieger had come to see Nana Lou twice. The first time was a Tuesday afternoon in May. He had bought a cannoli. He had told her, very gently, that he could offer $400,000 for her to walk away. Relocate where, mister? Krieger, she had asked. Relocate is just a word. I have lived here since the year my husband was 31. He had smiled the smile that already knows the answer, and he had left his card. She had used the card to scoop a piece of dough off the floor an hour later. The second time was September. The cannoli he bought that day stayed on the counter, untouched after he left. The offer had risen to $650,000. He told her gently again that the building's owner, a man in Florida she had never met, had already signed the conditional sale. Her lease, Krieger reminded her, had a 90-day eviction clause for new ownership. Mrs. Castaldi, he had said, we are giving you the chance to do this with dignity. She had pointed at the door. That night she had stayed in the bakery past midnight, kneading bread she did not need, until her arms ached so badly that she went upstairs and fell asleep in her clothes. The 90-day clock had started on the 1st of October. By the morning of the black SUV, she had 30 days left. She did not, in those first 30 days, behave like a woman with 30 days left. She baked. She unlocked the door at 6. She locked it at 8. She lit candles for Vito on Sundays. She let Marco read her the certified mail. Then she put the certified mail in a drawer with all the other certified mail and did not look at it again. She believed, with a stubbornness her late husband would have recognized in an instant, that if she kept living her ordinary life perfectly, the world would lose interest and go bother somebody else. The black SUV did not lose interest. On day 1 she had told herself, a salesman. On day 2, a driver waiting on a fare. On day 3, when the same Escalade was in the same spot at the same 6 a.m., she stopped telling herself anything. On day 4, she watched the man from behind the counter. The driver got out exactly once, around noon, walked to the corner deli, came back with a paper cup, got back in. Tall, broad shoulders, black wool coat too heavy for early October. She could not see his face. On day 5 she sent Marco out to look without looking. Marco came back pale and said, Nana, the plate's New York but the registration sticker is for a leasing company. She told him to mind his bread. On day 6 the wind came up. The Escalade did not move. By closing time she was angry, not afraid angry. Krieger had hired men. Of course he had. He was trying to scare her, to make her old heart pound, to make Marco worry. She fell asleep that night with her jaw set. Day 7 was a Tuesday. At 10:15, in a lull between rushes, she took 2 cannoli off the tray, fresh, ricotta still cold, shells still crackling, set them on a paper plate, covered them with wax paper, and handed the plate to Marco. Take these across the street, she said. Knock on the window. Be polite. Smile like I taught you. Tell the man my grandmother sends these. Then come back. Marco swallowed. He had been in 3 fistfights in his life, none serious, and he had never knocked on the window of a parked SUV with tinted glass. But this was Nana Lou. He went. She watched him from behind the lace curtain. She watched him cross between 2 parked cars. She watched him knock, very gently, twice. For a long second nothing happened. Then the tinted window slid down 3 or 4 inches, and a hand emerged. Tan, square, thick knuckles, a gold ring on the small finger, a heavy watch on the wrist. Marco said something. The hand took the plate. Then the man inside the car spoke softly, almost amused. Tell your grandmother, the man said, that Mr. Sabatucci sends his regards. The window slid back up. Marco stood on the curb with his hands empty and his mouth open. He could not, for a moment, Remember which way the bakery was." Then he walked back very slowly, pushed the door open, and the bell rang, and Nana Lou looked up, and Marco said, "Nana," he said, "Sabatucci." He said, "Mr. Sabatucci." Nana Lou did not faint. She did not put her hand on her chest. She did not sit down. She set down the rolling pin with great care, as if it might break. She said only softly, in Italian, "Madonna mia salvi." Marco said, "What does that mean, Nana? Who is that?" She did not answer for a long minute. She was looking through him, 53 years back, into a winter night in 1971, when a different man, older, gentler, with a hat in his hands, had stood on the same sidewalk and asked her husband Vito for a loaf of bread and a place to sit down for an hour. She blinked. She wiped flour from her hands on her apron. "Finish the lemon glaze on the sfogliatelle," she said. "I need to think." And she walked back into the kitchen, and she did not come out again until 4. She did not call her cousin in Bensonhurst. She did not call her daughter in Florida. She did not call the parish. She did not, God forgive her, call the police. She thought instead. She thought while she needed a batch of dough she did not need. She thought about Vito at 31 and Vito at 43 and Vito at the kitchen table at midnight, with a glass of grappa in his hand, saying once, only once in all their years, that there were certain people in the neighborhood who had been kind to them, and that a Castaldi did not forget a kindness, ever, even if it came from a man whose name you did not say out loud. At 5 o'clock she untied her apron. She washed her hands. She put on her good cardigan, the one with the small silver buttons. She walked, without telling Marco anything, out the front door, across the narrow street, past the parked cars, and up to the driver's side of the black Cadillac Escalade. She did not knock gently. She rapped the glass 3 times with the back of her knuckle, the way she rapped a melon at the market. The window came down, all the way this time. The man inside turned and looked at her. He was 64. Silver hair combed straight back from a wide forehead. Blue eyes that had once been very dark. A face that, in the slant of late afternoon light, looked like a man who had spent his life arranging things quietly. He smiled very faintly. "Signora," he said. She studied him for a long second. Then she said, in a voice that was clear and Brooklyn and a little bit tired, "I haven't seen your face in 53 years, Salvi." He blinked. Slowly. Then he laughed, a soft, surprised laugh, the laugh of a man who had not been surprised in a long time. "Mrs. Castaldi," he said. "I was 11. She nodded. "You were 11. You had a chipped front tooth. You hid behind your father's leg." He touched the tooth still chipped, slightly with his tongue, an old habit. "Yes, signora," he said. She looked at the SUV. She looked at the bakery across the street. She looked back at him. "Park around the back," she said. "The neighborhood will talk. There's an alley behind the bakery. Pull the car all the way in. Come inside for coffee in the morning. 6 o'clock. Use the kitchen door. Do not bring your friends." He inclined his head once. "Yes, signora," he said. She turned and walked back across the street. Her knees ached the whole way. She did not look back. That night she slept, for the first time in 9 days, like the dead. At 6 o'clock on day 8, the kitchen door of Castaldi's forno opened from the alley, and Salvi Sabatucci stepped inside. He was tall, taller than he had looked sitting down, with the unhurried movements of a man trained, long ago, never to seem in a hurry. He took off his coat. He hung it on the hook beside Nana Lou's apron. He sat down on the high wooden stool at the marble counter, where Vito used to work the dough. She poured him an espresso. She poured one for herself. She slid a plate of biscotti across the marble. She did not sit down. She stood across from him with her hands flat on the counter, and she waited. He took a sip. He set the cup down. He said in English, "Your husband Vito did a kindness for my father in 1971 that I have been carrying for 53 years. I would like to repay it." She said, "Your father is alive." He nodded. "He is 91. He is in Long Island. He still asks about you." She felt something move in her throat. She did not let it reach her face. "I heard about the developer 6 weeks ago," he said. "A man I know mentioned the block. I read your lease. I read his loan terms. I had my lawyer look at the building." He paused. "I am here for 30 days," he said. "From day 1, yesterday when you saw me first, to day 30. During those 30 days, Mr. Krieger will not approach you, will not look at you, will not call your lawyer, will not send another certified letter. Anyone he sends, and he will send people, will be met 2 corners away by men who will be polite but firm. No one will be hurt. Words will be exchanged. They will go home. They will not come back," she said, and after 30 days. He smiled very thinly. "After 30 days, Signora, the situation will be such that Mr. Krieger no longer wants this block. After 30 days, the kindness will be repaid. Or if you wish, kept open. Your call." She did not answer right away. Then she said, "What was the kindness, Salvi?" He set his cup down. He looked at the marble. "My father was in trouble in the winter of 71, he said. A misunderstanding with men from a different family in Newark. He had to be off the streets for 48 hours. He came here, to this bakery. Your husband, who knew my father from the social club on 86th, gave him a chair in the back kitchen, a cup of coffee, and a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. He did not ask my father why. He let him sit for 1 hour. He let him use the telephone. He let him out through the alley. Then he closed up and walked home with my mother and forgot it ever happened. He did not, my father has said many times, charge for the bread." She closed her eyes. She remembered the bread. She remembered Vito coming up the stairs that night and washing his hands for a long time at the kitchen sink and not saying a word. Salvi cleared his throat. "My father has carried that loaf for 53 years, he said. He is 91. He would like to die with the debt settled. He sent me." She opened her eyes. She said, "All right, Salvi." He nodded once. He stood. At the door he turned. "Signora, one more thing. You will not see me much during the 30 days. I will be in the car or near it. If a customer asks, I am a private driver for a sick old man across the street. If a reporter asks, you do not know me. If Mr. Krieger himself, God forbid, knocks on your door, you say only that you are not selling. Everything else I take care of." He left through the kitchen door. The morning rush began at 6:15, as if nothing had happened. Days 9 through 30 passed exactly the way Salvi had said they would. Mr. Krieger sent intermediaries, a man with a clipboard on day 11, a woman in a beige suit on day 14, 2 men with a measuring tape on day 18. None got within sight of the bakery's front door. They were intercepted at the corner by polite men in long coats who walked them backwards 3 steps, talked quietly to them for 2 or 3 minutes, and watched them get back into their cars and drive away. There was no violence. There was no shouting. There was only the kind of conversation that, decades later, the intermediaries still could not quite reconstruct word for word. Krieger sent certified mail. Salvi's lawyers, a small firm in Mineola with a name no one had ever heard of, sent back replies stuffed with procedural objections, requests for clarification, citations to municipal codes that had not been used in court since 1987. The 90-day eviction clock paused. then paused again, then paused a third time. By day 45, Krieger's construction loan was costing him $14,000 a day in interest. By day 16. On day 63, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, acting on a petition quietly filed 2 weeks before by a Bensonhurst Heritage Society nobody at the parish had ever heard of, designated the building at 18th and 72nd as a landmark of cultural significance, citing its 65-year continuous operation as one of the last pre-redevelopment brick oven bakeries in Brooklyn. Demolition was, effective immediately, off the table forever. Mr. Krieger learned about the landmark designation from a press release at 7 a.m. on a Friday. He threw a coffee mug across his Midtown office. He called 3 lawyers in a row. None returned his calls within the hour. By the end of the day, his investors were on the phone asking questions he did not want to answer. By day 90, his 90-day clock, the clock that was supposed to end Nana Lou's lease, had been buried under so many procedural amendments and landmark filings that his own attorney told him, by email, that to evict the tenant at this point would require a separate legal action that would take 18 months, cost $1 million in fees, and almost certainly lose. Mr. Krieger sat in his office on day 91 and stared out the window of the 38th floor for a long time. Then he signed off on the formal withdrawal of the eviction notice. The notice was delivered to Nana Lou's lawyer by messenger at 10 the next morning, and to Nana Lou by Marco, reading it aloud at the counter at 10:15. She did not smile. She did not cross herself. She nodded once. "Marco, the oven needs more wood," she said. And she went back to her dough. On the same morning, the eviction was dropped. A small holding company registered in Delaware quietly closed on the entire block. The buyer was a paper name. Behind the paper was Salvi Sabatucci, and behind Salvi was his father in Long Island, and behind the father, in a sense, was Vito Castaldi, still kneading bread on a cold night in 1971. The first official act of the holding company, recorded in the lease amendment filed on day 93, was to extend the lease on the storefront at 18th and 72nd to one Lucia Castaldi for the term of her natural life, at an annual rent of $1 United States dollar, assignable upon her death or retirement to one heir of her choosing. The amendment was 11 pages long. The single substantive clause, life tenancy, $1 one heir, fit in 3 lines. On day 95, Salvi came to the bakery on foot for the last time as the man in the SUV. He wore his black coat. He bought a Sfogliatella. He paid for it $3.50 and put the change in the tin box. Then he asked Nana Lou, quietly, if she would walk with him to the coffee shop on the corner for 10 minutes. She took off her apron. She put on her good cardigan. They sat at a small round table in the back, by the window, where the light fell on the marble in soft yellow squares. "Signora," he said, "the lease is yours for as long as you live, and Marco's after you if Marco wants it. The building is mine now on paper, but it is yours in every way that matters." He paused. "My father wanted you to know, and these were his exact words in Italian. I will translate them for you, that he never forgot the bread Vito gave him in 71 when he had nowhere to sit down. He said, 'My father is 91. He would like, with your permission, to come once in a while. To sit at the counter. To eat one cannoli. To talk to you for an hour about Vito. He will not bring anyone. He will not come often. He is an old man, and the ride from Long Island is long. But if you say yes, Signora, he will come.'" Nana Lou took a long breath. She looked out the window at her bakery across the street, at the open sign her husband had hung in 1959, at the brick chimney curling its thin column of wood smoke into the November sky, at the window where, 53 years ago, a tall man had stood with a hat in his hands. She thought of Vito at the sink that night, washing his hands for a long time, not saying a word. She turned back to Salvi. "Your father is welcome any time," she said. "Tell him to come on Tuesdays. The cannoli are best on Tuesdays." Salvi smiled, for the first time since he had stepped into her kitchen on day 8, the smile of a man who had finally set down something heavy. He paid the check. He walked her back to the bakery door. He kissed her once on each cheek, formally, the way his father had taught him to kiss the women of his father's friends, and he said, "Signora, the debt is paid." She said the bread was free, Salvi. It was always free. He shook his head very gently. "No, Signora. No. It was never free. We just didn't pay until now." Then he walked away down 18th Avenue, his black coat catching the wind, and he did not come back. 6 months passed. Spring came hard and late and beautiful to Bensonhurst. The trees on 18th Avenue put out their leaves all at once in the second week of May, and the air smelled of cut grass and exhaust, and near Castaldi's Forno, the faint sweet ghost of burnt sugar that hung on the block at all hours and was, the neighborhood agreed, the smell of home. The bakery was thriving. Word of the landmark designation had traveled the way these things travel in Brooklyn, slowly, through aunties and barbers and parishioners, and it had brought a new kind of customer to the door. Young people mostly. Couples with strollers from Park Slope. Food bloggers with cameras. Architecture students who wanted to photograph the brick oven for a thesis. Nana Lou let them photograph the oven. She did not let them photograph her. The line on Saturday morning stretched halfway down the block. Marco had given notice at his marketing firm in March. He had told his boss gently that his grandmother was 83 and that the bakery had been in the family for 65 years, and that part. The hardest part was the people. Mrs. Genovese only liked the rolls from the back tray. Father Donato pretended he was buying for the rectory. Tommy from Staten Island liked his sfogliatella with the lemon glaze, not the sugar. You learn the people, Marco. You learn the people, and the bread takes care of itself. Salvi's father, his name was Tommaso, though almost no one in the bakery ever called him anything but Signor, had come on the third Tuesday after the lease was signed. He had come in a black town car driven by a different, younger man, not Salvi. He had come in a charcoal suit and a fedora, and he had walked into the bakery with both hands held out, palms up, the way old men of his generation walked into the houses of women they respected. He was small. He had grown small in the way old men do. He had a chipped front tooth, like his son, and the same wide forehead, and the same blue eyes that had once been very dark. He had sat at the counter on the stool where Vito used to sit, and he had eaten one cannoli, slowly, with a small fork, and he had talked to Nana Lou for 1 hour about Vito. About Vito at the social club on 86th in 1968. About Vito the night of the blackout in 1965, when he had carried 2 loaves of bread up 6 flights of stairs to a woman with a newborn. And about Vito the night in 71, and here Tommaso had paused, and put down his fork and put his hand for a moment on the marble, and said, in Italian, "Your husband was a good man, Lucia. A quiet man. He did not know he was saving my life. He thought he was giving me a loaf of bread." Sometimes those are the same thing. Nana Lou had not cried in front of him. She had cried later, alone in the kitchen, into a bowl of dough that nobody would ever eat. Tommaso came every Tuesday after that. The town car would pull up at 10:30. He would walk in. He would sit at the counter. He would eat one cannoli. He would talk to Nana Lou for 1 hour. He would leave a $5 bill in the tin box, which Marco, on Tommaso's insistence, never gave back. He was 91. He moved very slowly. The neighborhood, which had figured out exactly who he was within about a week, watched him come and go each Tuesday and said nothing. The neighborhood was very good at saying nothing. There was no black SUV anywhere on the block. There had not been for half a year. Above the counter now, beside the framed first dollar and the photo of Vito at 31 in his paper hat, hung a new frame. Small, simple, black wood. Inside the frame were two photographs, side by side. The one on the left was Vito in 71, behind the same marble counter, holding a long loaf of bread, looking at the camera with the same patient half-smile he had carried his whole life. The one on the right was Tommaso Sabatucci in 71, 30 years old, lean and dark and tired, photographed by Vito himself on a Polaroid the morning after that long winter night, sitting at the same counter, eating the same bread. Salvi had given Nana Lou both photographs in an envelope on the day. He closed the holding company's books. "Signora," he had said, "I thought these belonged in your kitchen." Marco had matted them himself. The frame hung at exactly the height of an 83-year-old woman's eyes. Nana Lou looked at it every morning when she came down the stairs to light the oven. She did not say anything. She did not have to. She lit the fire the way she had lit it for 65 years. She mixed the dough. She set the loaves to rise. She flipped the sign in the window, the same paper sign, slightly more yellowed now from closed to open. The street outside was empty. The trees were green. The morning smelled of bread. She refused to move. A car parked outside for 30 days. Some debts are carried, not in ledgers, not in lawyers' letters, not in the glass towers of Midtown, but in bakers' hands, kneaded into dough at 4 in the morning, given away warm to a stranger in a hat 53 years ago, and remembered quietly by a man who finally came back to say thank you.